Hey, this is Gavin Palmer, and your attention is the most valuable resource in the world. So, one of the wizards or sorcerers, or with the people who know that they are, because we all are, and he taught me this, one of them pointed me at a video, and this is some feedback about that video. So let me begin. So the video is called Individuation, Producing Logos XXI. Channel the word XXI. And this was my first time encountering this video, and I was impressed. So let's just start with let me start with a summary, general summary. That way, if you get bored and you have more important things to do, you can go somewhere else. He's going into the spiritual world, and the spiritual world is that which occurs outside the physical, so it'd be the metaphysical, and that happens in your mind. And then he's expressing those spirits and recording them and consuming them and digesting them and using that feedback to make changes. So that in itself was impressive. And he called it an experiment right off the bat. And it's impressive, and it's something that I recommend with caveats. He encouraged people to be very cautious, and I do too. The spiritual world has many powers and principalities, and some of them can be very violent. And so I noticed all of these spirits, and I have selected for what people might call the Holy Spirit. And I've been doing that for maybe a decade or more. I've at least been recording myself for like a decade doing it. And so I've been doing something similar that this channel has been doing or recommended in this video, but with less talent with regard to the audience. I was more concerned with shaping my character in this story, which is the one that we are all in, and attempting to identify the Holy Spirit and express the Holy Spirit. So that's the summary of why I'm interested. I found there was a comment asking for a Discord. I don't know if it's interesting how that works. I went to the Discord, and there's a channel called Feedback. So these are like, as far as my tests, I run experiments as well. Who should I pay attention to? Well, I like to pay attention to, for example, people that I can get in contact with, people that will receive feedback. That's right out of the bats. This channel is doing good. There's other experiments, so I'm impressed. And now the slow part. So if you have a lot of things to do, have a good day. I completely understand. So let's go through this thing.
Performing a crazy experiment on myself.
I think Young calls it
Performing a crazy experiment on myself. Like that right there. We can run experiments, and we can do experiments on ourselves. Putting a camera up and recording yourself, sharing your thoughts, allows you to review, because our minds are so limited. It's hard to remember, but we can record it and we can review our expressions. Athletes do this, but if you're attempting to express, we are always expressing spirits, so it's a good idea to review the spirit that you are expressing. Now, he's going to go into the experiment itself in a little bit more detail, but that's the basics, and that's a very important point. A lot of times we don't even express the spirits that are within our minds, and that's why you'll pay to have someone listen to you so that you don't go insane. When oftentimes you only need a camera and a recording that you review, and then try to analyze and try to shape yourself so that you can identify multiple spirits and select for the right ones.
Individuation.
This process of individuation.
This is like Voldemort and his Horcruxes.
How all these factors move toward a whole, a totality.
Dark magic.
Total unity. Declaration of the final solution to the human question.
Godlike consciousness.
I think if you split your mind into multiple parts and harmonize them in dramatic form, the process of doing that is itself the process of individuation.
So the only thing there that is different than my approach is, I would say, is dramatic form. And he talks about dark magic. I tend to agree, but you know, what do we mean, and what does the audience hear? But yeah, dramatic form. Dramatic form would be, yeah, there might be an element there that I'm missing, and I don't know what dramatic form would do to me. So I don't know how that would, I don't know the power of dramatic form. I don't know how necessary it is.
I don't know how crazy the process of producing hours of dialogue was, because it's a ping pong, a constant back and forth between two loci of consciousness, with two people at once, and you have to balance them. But when I...
One thing, so he's talking about two loci, two personalities, two spirits. What's interesting is there are an infinite number of spirits. Yeah, and then there's questions where I have answers about, well, which spirits should we be expressing? But I think this is good because humans, we're very limited. We're born as babies, and our ability to comprehend complex amounts, large and complex information is limited. Like, we're limited in our ability to do that. So juggling two spirits is it's a good starting point, right? So there can be a third and a fourth and a fifth and an infinite number of spirits.
enact them, I can only do one at a time, unless I do just audio, which I've also done. It's easier. But when I do it in front of a camera, I do like 1 hour or 2 hours of Joker, and then I do 2 hours of Dictator.
So that's interesting. There's a concept there of allowing a spirit, expressing a spirit for a period of time and not breaking character. And it reminds me of actors. And, you know, what does acting do? And it reminds me of Heath Ledger, who ended up, you know, playing the Joker. And what did that do to him, right? I remember when that happened, I was thinking about it and how these very good actors can bond themselves with the spirit of the thing itself. And that's a Miyamoto Musashi phrase. There's a spirit of the sword, perhaps, right? But it's interesting that becoming fully immersed in a single spirit, yeah, that might be a hard thing for me to do personally. I've had it happen a few times where and you can call it possessed, you can call it hypnotized, but I am pretty good at breaking away from, and it comes naturally, and you could potentially, it's a strength and a weakness, right? So that's, you know, we each have different strengths and weaknesses. That's my icon of the Star of David. That Star of David for me is, you know, one triangle represents strength, one triangle represents weaknesses. That's why it's nice to have a community to provide feedback. And you know, we can digest our own content and do our own kinds of feedback, but we don't know what we don't know. And so that's where it's nice to have a community. My wife and children, for example. Let's continue.
And then when I edit it, man, the 2 hours of Joker I have to cut into maybe 500 pieces. And the 2 hours of Dictator I have to cut into 500 pieces. And then I have to put them together. And that process, man, I mean, it does something to your mind.
Split the...
See, I've never done that process with the editing of videos, but I have done that process of creating a video and then scrapping it and recreating a video and scrapping it and recreating a video. And I have done, writing a blog and then editing it and trying to respect people's attention and condense it down into something that is meaningful and good, or it accomplishes my goal. I could put it. I like that phrase. So one thing I want to ask this person is, what's your goal? Like because you've got a feedback channel, you've got a means for people providing feedback. What I've learned is, if I just start providing feedback, I'm going to waste your time and attention, and you might perceive me as a threat if my goals are different than your goals. So I'm not here to change you when I provide feedback. I'm here to learn about your goals. So if you can explicitly state your goals, then I can, and if I can remind myself about your goals, then I can provide better feedback. If I can, because I practice loving everyone, including my enemies. I can love my enemies, I can learn their goals, and I can actually provide valuable feedback for them and their goals. Right? And I usually will do that so long as, and this is how I discern the spirits, so long as we aren't as long as our actions aren't causing harm, which is actually quite hard. So sometimes it's obvious, and a lot of times it's not so obvious, because there's always side effects of the things we do. Like, do we ever avoid causing harm? I'm producing these signs and symbols and signals, and everyone will interpret them. And if they don't try to love me, they will become possessed by an interpretation. There'll be a spirit in which interprets the words. And if there's not a holy, loving spirit, then there won't be a skepticism of questioning the spirit in which the words were interpreted. So if the audience doesn't share the spirit and can't share the spirit that I have, then they won't understand me. And so they might see something I did not intend to communicate. And that's why it's dangerous to become popular and to be a popular person who's putting out signs and symbols and signals. That's why the sorcerers got upset with Kanye West and Scott Adams, for example. Well, that's not the real reason. I think the real reason is selfish motivations of people wanting to preserve their power. But we can talk about that later.
The ego of the poet into two by forcing them to switch between two antagonistic but complementary perspectives. The intention here is to harmonize a mind which is by nature bifocal.
You mean you want to...
I think that's beautiful. It's connected to two eyes. We are bifocal eyes, which is going to shape our mind, our natural tendencies. I wonder about the third eye, but yeah, we've been trained a certain way. I would say, maybe you don't have two eyes. Maybe you have one. And then I would just add eyes and ears and nose and skin. And it's like, I'll just add that as a caveat, but two is better than one and none. And I like that they're antagonistic. This is related to the Star of David, remembering our strengths and weaknesses and allowing them to complement each other, and then also doing that as a community. So you can do it within yourself, like being suggested by this video, and you can do it. And there's practices we can do in order to do it as an individual, as this wonderful person is teaching. And then there's also practices where as we've done it and do it with ourselves, we can also do it with others. And this is what a marriage is. If you're fortunate enough to have a marriage where there is honesty and truth, where in a common goal and a capacity to provide feedback so that we reach common goal together.
Poetically engineer
a bifocal consciousness by means of the Chat God challenge?
So in a marriage, when I'm providing like an antagonistic feedback to my wife, she may perceive me as the Joker character or some kind of sinister, thing that might be like a monster or whatever. I'll just have to be careful about that, and have to be careful about the ego. Like when we become defensive, we perceive a threat, usually a threat to our ego, and being able to go into that relationship and understand how it can be of service to each other is key. It's key. And notice when you become defensive, and really work through that defensiveness. I think because this person is acting in a way, there is an ease in which this person can force or encourage these characters to cooperate and collaborate and complement, and that can be easier than a marriage where you have two different humans that need to cooperate and collaborate and complement. I find that humans have these kinds of, what do you call it, contradictions. So diction is to dictate. It's like to speak forth, and so there are these contradictory characters, and within every human are these contradictory characters that are not expressing themselves. So whenever you hear teachings about the word is escaping me, but the meaning of the word is when you essentially act in a way which does not align with your words, who you say you are. And this is because there are contradictory characters. So the word is a hypocrite. And it was encouraged to me that I avoid naming things, right? So you see, I just named something. Nobody wants to be named a hypocrite. But the thing is when you act in a way which doesn't agree with that which you say, it's an indicator that there are these antagonistic forces or contradictory spirits that are at work, and they have not been harmonized together. And this practice of recording, and for example, the goal of searching for those contradictions and attempting to allow them to complement each other is fruitful.
80%, 90% of my mind was always just thinking about the writing, not so much about the production. But what I've realized in the process of producing it is that, well, first I write, and then I reflect on what I've written. So I judge my writing, and there's a feedback loop, but then I embody it when I enact it, right? And not only that, but I film it, I record it, and then I look at it.
And that's really cool. So I do this. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm an employee, I'm a neighbor. There's all these roles, and I'm attempting to be the best I can be, hopefully such that I can help the most number of people possible. And so I've been doing this self-reflection with the goal of improving the characters, attempting to organize them properly into the proper hierarchy and all of that. And so I am practicing and embodying. And what I've had the thought before is like, okay, what if we recorded every single thing? What if everything was recorded? And I actually think it is. Everything is recorded going into some hard drive. But we could also mimic what's happening in the spiritual world, in this world, and record everything. And a lot of it's noise. But there are moments we could go back and revisit where maybe there was a disagreement about what happened. This happens all the time. This is why history can't be trusted, because the people in your marriage could look back at yesterday and disagree about what happened. But what if it was all recorded and you could go back and look at it and reflect and attempt to collaborate toward a common goal, or the highest goal, for example, that would be very powerful. And so in this experiment that he is explaining, and I'm assuming he, the the rules of the game have facilitated this kind of development. The rules and the technology and the processes could be applied at other levels. And that's what we can do as a species, is we can go and play these games and run the experiments in the virtual space with ourselves and with other people in the virtual space, and we can bring them out of the spiritual realm and embody them properly, or embody them, if you don't like that word, properly. Properly, it just means that it depends on the goal and the situation. And, you know, I have goals, and it'd be nice to find people who have similar goals. I'm glad I found this channel, and what's interesting is once I subscribed, the person that I talked to yesterday who listened to me and understood me, and I communicated just gratitude to be able to speak with someone who can listen and understand me in a world where I can't find anyone who can listen and understand me, except my wife, but I can't find any other men that can listen and understand me. And so this man listened and understood me. I was grateful. There's tears. And he said, there are other people like me. And that's how he can understand me. And I go to this Discord server, and he was in the Discord server for this channel, this character, this person. So yeah, it would be nice to find people who have these, it'd be nice if we share the same highest common goal, but we can also share relative common goals that maybe aren't the highest. Like, my highest common goal would be something like, to put the most simple version is provide clean water for all people on earth. An abundant supply of clean water for all people on earth to facilitate health and opportunity. I can avoid all the naming of things and just be explicit and specific. And so if that's kind of the biggest goal, the broadest goal, you know, where does that sit next to husband, father, employee? I'm trying not to forget clean water for all people on earth, while husband, father, employee, and we have a limited amount of things we can juggle, so there are times where I forget clean water for all people on earth. But if I can find people who are serious about goals that I think are good, which I just can't juggle because I have a limited brain, I'm a human, we can work together toward these sub-goals which facilitate the higher goals, such that accomplishing these sub-goals allow all of us to become more productive toward our goals, no matter what they are. That's what I'm interested in as a tool maker, as an engineer.
Feel the urge to meditate right now. Why is my little brother so angry?
And he's acting here, but breathe through your nose. That's what I read, and it has cured disease. Breathing through your nose instead of your mouth. Try not to be a mouth breather, if you can remember. Breathing's so important, and we get into habits. We get into habits about how we walk and how we breathe. And there are better ways. There are always better ways. And so how do you breathe properly? How do you walk properly? Well, we don't know what we don't know, and sometimes it helps to learn from other people and receive feedback from other people. So maybe the sentence I'll drop in the feedback channel for this YouTube channel is, practice breathing through your nose. Now, if I do that, does it align with the goals? Will I be perceived as a threat? You know, I don't know. Complex character. It's hard to reduce all of this that's happening in the spiritual world, which I am expressing? And how much discernment am I doing on the spirits in my mind before I express them and bring them into existence? So, forgive me if I misspeak. Please forgive me if I misspeak. I am not the best communicator. That's one of my biggest weaknesses. This character appears to be better than me. You probably can look at subscriber counts to see how bad I am at communicating.
Why does he have to put these emotions into my consciousness?
Be careful with that. So one idea to consider, here's a spirit, like there's infinite numbers of spirits, so you could allow the spirit to pop in, breathe in through the nose, thank God for pain. It's like, what are these emotions, and can we look at every experience as a opportunity to learn and grow and become a better person and more productive toward our goals in this situation? Where did those emotions come from? Do we just want to try to push them to the side? Push them to the side? Is that what he's doing there in this character? People do that. I've done it.
And then I see how I embodied what was once only in my mind before I put it down on paper.
Yeah, I wanted to write a book about a world that transforms such that there is, for example, clean water for all people on Earth. And then I'm like, well, that might be a boring book. Actually, I think I've always aimed for peace on Earth, so that's a very boring book when there's peace. So maybe if I just aimed for clean water for all people on Earth, it wouldn't be so boring, because you could have a dictator, and you could have the Joker, and you could have all these characters who are aimed at this goal and neglecting everything else. Like, maybe all people except one person are killed so that all people on Earth have clean water. It's like, this is why you don't want your AI to go off just accomplishing a single-minded goal. But what I noticed is when I tried to write the story for how peace on Earth gets manifested is that I would rather not write the story, I would rather attempt to participate in the story. That's what comes to mind when he just said what he said.
And then I edit it.
All right, well, there are a few things we need to contextualize.
So that's this learning process we can do with ourselves, but because we don't know what we don't know, it's very useful to get feedback from others. Even if the feedback is, you're an idiot, or because you might not be an idiot. Maybe you even have to learn how to deal with people saying you're an idiot, which that's something I have to learn. And it provides feedback about the world. If you're attempting to create a story that involves the world, it's nice to know the perspectives of like every person in the world. It would be nice to know other perspectives, which could be done with information technology, which is part of my answer to my goal.
To explicate.
I don't even know how much time I spent on some of those dialogues. And that all feeds back into you. And then you watch the final product and it feeds back into you, with the music and the visuals and the effects and so on. It feeds back into you. So clearly what I have entered, same as any writer, same as anyone who puts down anything and then reflects on it, that is, consumes what they have expressed, digests what they have expelled, I enter into a feedback loop. And it's a very powerful feedback loop.
So that image right there.
Into a feedback loop. And it's a very...
So when I talked to the man who understood me yesterday, we talked about this. So he talked about the Ouroboros, and it's like we're just, he could say because my criticism is that we get into groups and we stay in a group and I call it a circle jerk. People can get into a circle and just pleasure each other. And he had talked about the Ouroboros and basically eating your own shit. And I pointed out, I was like, but the circle jerk is pleasurable. And he had pointed out, well, some people like shit. This concept. So feedback is very important. But you can get into like an echo chamber. You can, for example, focus on the algorithm with the goal of increasing subscribers, or maybe even it's a different goal, but subconsciously you care about what other people think, and maybe you care about sending your message to the most amount of people. And maybe sending your message to the most amount of people is relevant to your goal, and maybe it's not relevant to your goal. Maybe you're being counterproductive with your activities. And maybe you can't even see this because we don't know what we don't know, and so then and what I've found is when I attempt to come in and say, hey, I can help, I get ignored, which is funny. There's a YouTube channel where I watch this professional weightlifter. And he's not very large, but he's very strong, and he hides his muscles, and in one of the skits, he goes into the gym and acts like he's a trainer. And he's like, no, you're making mistakes. I'm a trainer. And he's got this like trainer sticker that just says trainer, and then he's got all these pictures that are photoshopped. So he's really leaning into trying to encourage people to believe that he is a fake. But just as soon as you say, hey, you're making a mistake, people immediately become defensive. And that's what I notice when I come into a group where people appear to be doing a circle jerk and attempt to be helpful. It's people become defensive, people ignore me. I did a recent blog post called Faith Shaker. I'm the Faith Shaker. I've been shaking my own faith for so long that I just kind of do it instinctually, and then when you do that with other people and shake their faith, they will become defensive because they're doing a circle jerk, right? Whether it's just themselves or them and other people, and they will become defensive. So that's what came to mind. The feedback's very important, but you have to be careful when you're doing it by yourself or with a group of people and you're not allowing feedback from outside the group. Yeah, so I talked about why I like this channel. There's a Discord server and there's a feedback channel. Well, hopefully I can figure out this person's goals, provide useful feedback to help them be more productive, because that's the Holy Spirit trying to be of service, being a servant. And yeah, and then, maybe there is or is not some group doing a circle jerk, and I don't know what my feedback will do and what kind of feedback will cause, this person or some group of people to become defensive. And then it would be nice to find people who actually notice the defensiveness, and this practice that this person is doing should help him notice when the spirit of becoming defensive emerges, and can notice it, and at least can notice it and analyze it from three perspectives. You've got this kind of king and the Joker, and then the blended character. That's three perspectives. So that's what comes to mind with this picture. The Ouroboros and the feedback loops and echo chambers and the circle jerks.
Very powerful feedback loop. You can say that the form is above it all because that's what is being represented. That's what is being embodied by the characters. David Donnerstein is one side of the human mind and God's joke with the other. And then, well, I'm currently writing with 5 characters, so it's really... Okay,
there you go, 4 or 5 characters, and maybe even the one that tries to combine them all, or some mix of them.
Important to me to convey this form.
It's on the wall. I look at it every day for a few times, because just to remain conscious of how the mind looks like. God. Anyhow.
And to make it vivid and to show by example how to imitate it, because I am convinced that that's the path to individuation. That's the path to the golden mind. The path.
So there's like an icon there that, I don't necessarily understand. I mentioned my icon of the Star of David. Then we just had an icon of the Ouroboros. There's maybe even icons of yin and yang.
Of the golden mind? I like that.
that's the proper way of engaging with the word, you know, during the onset of the virtual age. I think that's the best possible positive feedback loop, the best possible self-transformative feedback loop that you can enter into. You can do it by yourself, you don't need anybody.
There's a part, you can do it by yourself, you don't need anybody. It depends on your goals. It depends on your goals. And you can do it by yourself, depending on your goals. You can get better by yourself. If you have a good team, you and your team will get, you with your team will get better than you without your team. Then we have bad actors, and that's another problem. And so your team probably needs at least one or more. I would recommend more than one, because you don't want the bus factor, where the bus takes out your defense against the dark arts instructor and all of a sudden you're screwed. You need a few people who know defense against the dark arts. Let's go.
Don't just listen, brothers and sisters, but hear what I am saying. I am mentally instigating nothing less than the democratization of the incarnation, poetic engineering of godliness, absolute freedom for those wielding the power of the world.
You should.
That character, he said democratization. I'm not sure about the democracy. The man I spoke to yesterday, and he said, when I'd said, that's why we need a king instead of a democracy, and we need kings. I said that, and he said, that depends on what you mean. And he eventually got around to saying, what you're looking for is people who want to be kings. And I said, yeah. And what can happen is that the people who want to be kings, and I would say queens as well, but we can work together, and the ability for us to produce good fruit depends on like the quality and quantity of people in that group. So it doesn't need to be everyone in the world, and it doesn't need to be a majority of the people in the world, and it just needs to be connecting with the right people and cooperating and complementing each other.
But have someone in your embodied life to keep you grounded.
Now this is a good part, but I wanted to I say it's a good part. Every part's strengths and weaknesses, trade-offs, things like that. When you have a bunch of people who want to be kings trying to work together, the question becomes, what is the decision-making process? And is it a democracy among the people who want to be kings? You know, we, people interested in kingdoms, should, and like what I said to this man yesterday is, if I'm the king, it's because I'm a big fish in a small pond. So I might be like the king of my house with my wife and children. I'm not the king of my neighborhood or my city. So that's why I'm interested in being a good king, is because I'm a king. I am a king. We can all, yeah. There's a bunch of men, that's another thing I mentioned to the man. There's a bunch of men who don't have a lot of responsibility. It's like, for example, there's men who don't have children and have never had children. So, yeah. But we should be interested in kings and kingdoms, for sure.
To exert some sort of gravitational pull onto your mind, because if not, you might fly off. You might get lost in the world of mind.
There you go. My wife has done this for me. Kept me grounded. Because you can go off on the internet with people who have all the answers to the problems, and my wife says, well, what are you going to do about it? And so that's one of my phrases that I've adopted to people when people want to talk about the problems. And well, what are you doing about it? Because it happens to be that I have ideas for what we can be doing about it, and it turns out that most people actually prefer complaining. It's easier to talk about problems than it is to solve the problems, right? So my wife, I'm grateful for my wife. My children now, grateful for my children. I'm grounded. I'm grounded in that.
You might get drawn into the word. Yeah, you might just lose it. I'm really worried sometimes that, you know, like, because I want to inspire imitators of the meta exercise that I'm performing here, but I want to be absolutely clear that you need to have an embodied existence, because if not, your mind might leave your body, so to say. This is some serious shit, man. Like, this is some seriously dark magic.
And he's talking about it, and he will talk about it some more. I mean, this is what people are doing on the internet, the disembodied self. I mean, you've got people who are not fathers and are not husbands. You've got males who are not fathers and are not husbands, who are going on the internet and living in this virtual space where it's disembodied. And then the audience they don't smell the man, they don't see any of the fruits of the man, and then and it's like, well, in this disembodied space, how do you recognize the king in this disembodied space? Like, I'm the king of my house, but who's the king of the internet, right? So yeah, be very careful in this virtual realm.
This is like
and when I say virtual, I mean spiritual, disembodied realm, which it's within the mind, and you know, your first impression in the mind, first spirit, can be expressed, and we can learn to discern those. You don't want to do that, just blow them away. I mean, it's good to be able to do that as a first step, but it'd be nice to blow them away so that you can look at them from a distance and notice the different spirits before you allow that spirit to be expressed into the world. And that's spiritual warfare within us and the spiritual warfare among us.
Voldemort and his Horcruxes. It's crazy, man. I want to encourage you to do it, but I also want you to be aware that your locus of consciousness might become too attached to a virtual identity as opposed to an embodied identity.
There's another thing about those Horcruxes, like, what did Ye do? On the internet, in the disembodied realm. And the question for Ye would be like, what have you learned? And how have you grown as a person? And you know, are there things you should have learned that you haven't learned yet? And how are you going to learn those things that you should learn and haven't learned yet, right? And then if you do that, and then will the world allow you back in? And there's a chance they might not, because the world's corrupt, even though the world should let you back in once you become a better man, which we are all capable of.
That's part of the thing that's currently going awry in our culture, where people already have a virtual identity. They just have a very primitive form of virtual identity.
Yeah, my virtual identity, I even incorporated it as a legal entity, is hero looking for group. So there's my virtual identity. It was my identity previous to the legal incorporation, but it was, and I could talk about it, but the group, I realized at some point I couldn't just be hero, right? I couldn't be the hero on the internet or anything like that. I depend on a group, and I'm trying to network with people and find people who will provide feedback to me, help me become a better hero.
Called a profile, which is extremely limited, a Twitter self, in which you don't actually enter, usually people don't actually enter into a positive feedback loop with their own self-expression, but they enter into a positive feedback loop with the feedback they receive from unknown people. Self-reflection is almost lost, like literally. What I'm doing, writing, embodying it, shooting it while filming it, editing it, like that whole self-editing process, like the self-editing process during the writing process, the self-editing during the acting process, the self-editing during the editing. It's like all of that.
is he self-editing right before the signs and symbols are uttered from his noise piece there, his mouthpiece?
Is lost when you tweet. You don't actually go back on your timeline and reread it and restate it like few people do. And with WhatsApp messages and so on, it's not the same as, you know, the good old-fashioned letter, which you write in a very different state of mind, and where you get a very different response, very different feedback from a known person. It's just not the same. What we've
A feedback from a known person. Even when you receive feedback from a known person, it can be disregarded and laughed at and mocked and all of that. So there's a, yeah, I guess, I mean, I could run some experiments, but yeah. When you receive feedback from a known person, if you attempt to share your perspective and do it without becoming defensive, which is hard, the other person might be trying to change you. That's what I found. And maybe it's because I'm not going out and asking for feedback. And this is something maybe I should get better at, asking people I know for feedback. I've been practicing this at the dinner table, asking my wife and children for feedback at the dinner table about the day and anything that comes to mind. But this could be done at larger levels and scales with information technology too. Like it could be that people you know can use information technology. But honestly, it's not just people you know. It would be good to find people who are interested in kings and kingdoms and being those who see feedback as valuable and know that there is a better way that we can learn.
created with this virtual identity generating machine is really something toxic.
Soul bulimia.
So I'm going to pause. Maybe I'll end it there. I've got my responsibilities. You can hear them in the background. Yeah, this was some feedback. I don't want to keep going. And I'll just either keep this unlisted or share it publicly. Very interesting stuff. And yeah, I'm curious how this would be received, how this feedback will be received. I mean, the real question would be, what's your goal? I mean, I can just provide feedback. That's what I did, but I don't know your goal. Should I know your goal with just what we listened to together there? Encourage people to participate in the meta process with caution. Yeah, maybe. I've been recommending this as well, this process of recording yourself and then reflecting on that recording. That's the basic process, but ask yourself what your goals are. You've got short-term goals and long-term goals, and you've got these multiple goals, and then review your content with respect to your goals. So I would say try to be explicit with your goals in your feedback channel, for example. That would be nice. What I do with my writing is I use version control so that when people provide feedback to me, I can update the blog post, and I can even acknowledge people who provide feedback, and that way there's a history and it tracks what has changed. Notice that the writers in the world are not doing this, are not using version control and publicly publishing the transformation as it changes over time. So maybe that would be some feedback, is to consider version control so that people can see the evolution of the writing, whether you're writing for these scripts or whether you're writing for as a sorcerer in the mainstream media, or writing for a movie or anything, any kind of writing. Ask yourself, would putting this in version control and sharing that with others as a learning opportunity, would that cause harm to your goals, or would that be of service to your goals? So, and then maybe you can even do it in such a way where other people could help reflect upon the writing and provide feedback such that it changes things. And maybe, yeah, what happens when you find people who are playing characters on the internet and you start squeezing them together? Like, what if you and another person, Grim Grizz, Griswold Grimm channel, or maybe the guy I spoke to yesterday who understands me. You know, what happens when you guys get mixed together into a live stream, for example, where your practice in self-editing is embodied live. It's kind of like the rappers who can do it live and can just start putting words out to a beat. That's hard. It's hard for me. All right. Bye-bye.